Peter, thanks for coming on with us.
Oh, thanks for having me back on, Alex.
Where do we start? I mean, are we 30 seconds from midnight? I mean, how bad is it? What's really going on in the economy?
Well, it's no way to know exactly, the timetable, but obviously this economy is already back in recession. And if it's not in a recession, it's certainly on the cusp of one. But, if you look at the data that came out, we got industrial production numbers that came out earlier this morning. They were looking for a bounce. Instead, we got another decline. They revised the February number down. We got big inventories build again this week. Retail sales disappointed. I think it's clear that we could be in a negative GDP quarter right now. And, I think that if the first quarter is bad, the second quarter is going to be worse, because the last couple of years we had a rebound in the second quarter because we had very cold winters. Well, this winter was the warmest in 120 years. So there is nothing to rebound from. If anything, some of the activity might have been pulled into the first quarter from the second. Meanwhile, you've got this huge inventory glut that needs to be wound down, and the trade deficit is getting worse. So there's a lot bearing down on U.S. economic growth. The problem for the Fed is, how do they launch a new round of stimulus and still pretend the economy is in good shape? Because that's the message President Obama is trying to sell, and that's the message that Hillary Clinton is trying to run on, and Janet Yellen doesn't want to take the wind out of their sails.
What does it signify? Was my analysis accurate, or what can you add of what negative interest rates will do, and then what do you predict they're going to do?
Well, I mean, negative interest rates are a disaster. I mean, it's not working in Japan. It's not working in Europe. It's not going to work here. But just because it doesn't work doesn't mean we're not going to do it, because everything we do doesn't work, and we do it anyway. But I think it shows desperation that you've had all these central bankers lowering interest rates and expecting it to revive the economy. And then when they get down to zero, rather than admit that it didn't work, because clearly if you go to zero and you still haven't achieved your objective, maybe it doesn't work. Instead of admitting that they were wrong, they're now going negative, which is just sheer desperation. But I do believe as inflation really starts to turn around in Europe and Japan, the central banks there are going to be forced to abandon 0% rates, and they're actually going to have to raise rates pretty high to get out in front of that inflation curve. But the United States, I don't think we're going to do anything. No matter how high inflation gets, we'll do our best to pretend it doesn't exist or rationalize it away, because we have a lot more debt. I mean, America is broke. If you look at Europe and Japan, even though there is some debt there, overall, those are still creditor nations. The world still owes Europe money. The world owes Japan money. But America owes more money than all the other debtor nations combined. I mean, Trump is right about that. I mean, we are broke. We're flat broke, and we're living off this credit bubble, and we can't prick it. So other central banks may be able to raise their rates, but the Fed can't.
How do you see this unfolding? I mean, what are the next triggers? We hear about sovereign debt. We hear about corporate debt. We hear about state debt. I mean, what could trigger the next big implosion? A huge earthquake in California? I mean, I guess another subprime mortgage crisis they're talking about is coming soon. I mean, there's so many irons in the fire that I see as being able to be a trigger, or does it just keep sliding slowly? Because even mainline media now won't push the lie that they were just a year ago, that really the economy is doing fantastic. The only person doing that's Obama, who says we have the best economy ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Meanwhile, we got some consumer sentiment numbers come out today, much worse than expected. Small business sentiment came out the lowest in 2 years. That was earlier this week. And in fact, small business owners listed the weak U.S. economy as their main concern. I mean, so if businesses are so concerned about the economy, how can it be so great? If you've got Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders doing so well, Sanders is now almost neck and neck with Clinton in the national polls. He's only down by like 1 or 2 points. And I think Trump came out today. This is his biggest lead yet in the national polls. I mean, why is that? These are the two candidates that are the ones that are most running as anti-establishment. The economy is a wreck, and I can do something to fix it. If the economy was so good, these candidates wouldn't be attracting so much support. So, you're right, the economy is bad. It's just a question of people admitting it. And I think the trigger that's going to really send us into a higher gear is going to be the admission by the Fed that the economy is weak, or the markets figuring it out on their own And then you really get a decline in the dollar because now people start to realize that we're not going to get all these rate hikes that everybody's been betting on. We're going to get cuts. And the Fed doesn't have much room to cut because it only managed to raise rates to a quarter. So there's not a lot of stimulus left. All they've got is potentially negative rates and a huge round of quantitative easing. And this thing is going to blow up in the Fed's face.
Sure. I mean, if the Fed's wrong about interest rates being at zero, being good, why is the IMF and World Bank, why are they cheerleading around? I guess IMF's more European, World Bank's more U.S., but I mean, the two are connected at the hip. But both those groups are basically saying the same thing.
Yeah, well, they're not any smarter. In fact, the IMF is still projecting the U.S. economy to grow at about 2.2% this year, which, there's no chance of that happening because if you look at how bad the first quarter is, the rest of the year is going to have to be above 3%. And I don't know why the IMF would actually believe that. It's more this propaganda. The IMF, they're a bunch of bureaucrats. They want to believe that the U.S. economy is going to be strong because that's the Federal Reserve. That's the central bank's program. I mean, the government is trying to create economic growth, and the IMF wants to pretend that they're successful. They don't want to acknowledge all this government failure. The only way to get real economic growth is to get the government out of the way. Institutions like the IMF just interfere with economic growth.
I agree. We're about to go to break, and I want to come back and ask you just front and center, because you're the expert, other key things about the economy you want to impart to folks. Peter Schiff's our guest. But separately, I'm not happy the economy's falling apart. I'm not happy we're on a bubble. I'm not doom and gloom. I just want to be honest with people. Our audience has been roughly doubling every year for the last 5 or 6 years. It's growing even faster. More affiliates, more people watching videos, more people watching podcasts. Until, I mean, this even happened in 2008. But until about 2 or 3 years ago, as audience went up, our money went up. The amount of money coming in went up so I could expand with reporters and writers and everything else. Audience gets bigger, more money comes in. For the first time ever the last few years, our audience is exploding, but money is not going up, Peter. And I've gotten better at sponsors and raising money. So despite every trick I've got, it's harder than ever. Most media, as you know, is downsizing or going out of business. So I'm seeing it, even in a, quote, boom town where we're based like Austin, Texas, I'm seeing it across the country.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, people have less money. People have less money to spend, and so the advertisers are cutting back, and everybody's feeling it.
So I mean, you think, though, we may already actually be in a recession?
Yeah, well, all of the indicators, if you look at most of the economic indicators that are out there, they're flashing recession. I mean, the only thing that isn't is the low unemployment rate and the jobs that we're creating. But then when you look beneath the surface, and we've discussed this before on your program, when you realize that all the jobs that are being created are low-paying part-time jobs, the reason there are so many jobs is because people now have 2 or 3. And so if you have 3 jobs, that you count as having it's 3 instead of just 1. But they don't add up to one good full-time job. And you have lots of people who have left the labor force. And I think one of the reasons the unemployment claims are so low is because so few people are being hired that not that many people are being fired. You can't lose a job unless you get a job. And so since we're really creating so few legitimate jobs, there's not a lot of people that are collecting unemployment. So this economy is very weak, despite the rosy scenario, the fiction that the president is trying to paint. But Wall Street still doesn't get it. If you look at performance, investment performance in the first quarter, this was the worst quarter for actively managed accounts in 18 years.
Peter, stay there. Let's talk about the real state of the economy, the next shoe to drop, and more straight ahead. Peter Schiff, Europac.com. I'm Alex Jones with InfoWars.com. Stay with us. The reason I'm talking about earthquakes is I'm going to talk some about that in the next segment. I'm not somebody obsessed with volcanoes and earthquakes. Some people really are into that. They like those movies. They're always worried about it. I guess you kind of do if you live in like California or something. Or Japan, but they are saying, all the seismologists, California's way overdue. It's going to be like an 8.0 or bigger. What will that do to the economy? But it's a parallel to the economy already. People just don't think it's going to happen until it happens, and we're lined up for the biggest group of bubbles we've ever seen. Even the Royal Bank of Scotland says sell everything you've got, end of the world type stuff, now coming out of George Soros and others. And so I'm just asking, wow, is that just hype, or how big is it going to be? Is there any way to avoid it? Peter Schiff was just getting into some of the numbers coming out. Peter?
Well, no, I was talking before the break about how investors still just don't get what's going on, because for the past several years, everybody's been positioned as if this recovery were real, that it was sustainable, and that the Fed could normalize interest rates and everything was going to be fine. So they've been buying dollars, they've been buying certain assets. And the first quarter of this year, investment returns, it was the worst quarter in 18 years for actively managed funds. Most hedge funds lost money, barely any made any money at all, because they still don't get it. They still don't understand what's changed. Meanwhile, at Europe Pacific Capital, we had one of our best quarters in years, probably since 2009, because we're positioned for reality. I've been saying for the last few years, as this bubble's been inflating, that this whole narrative has been wrong, that the Federal Reserve has not solved our problems, but exacerbated them.
And you said that before 2008, so let me ask you this. I mean, speaking of earthquakes, you're famous for quoting, famous for this quote, 2008 was a tremor for the earthquake that's coming. Is that what you're still saying?
Yeah, and I've been saying that all along, even before 2008, because I saw 2008 coming, and unfortunately, I also saw how the government would respond to 2008. And they did exactly what I feared that they would do and what I warned they would do, and that is exactly why the real earthquake is still in our future. It's not in our past, and people have to prepare for that. And by the way, you know, silver hit a new high today for this year, for 2016. So people are starting to wake up. It's happening very slowly. But it's happening. And I'll
say this. I mean, I think Dent's really smart, and I agree with him on a lot of stuff. But when he thinks because gold is so finite, that's why it's not valuable. I mean, in the laws of economics I've seen, that makes it more valuable. And it has industrial uses, and all these elites are hoarding it.
He's got it backwards. It's scarcity is what makes it so valuable, or one of the things that makes it so valuable. If it was abundant, if it was everywhere, then obviously it wouldn't have a lot of value. And the idea that because it's scarce, it can't function as money is completely ridiculous, because gold is divisible. I mean, you can always adjust the price of gold higher, so you never run out of it. There's always enough.
Well, what about this, though? We now know they've been manipulating gold and silver down, as you said many years ago was going on, and others did. They now admit that so much is rigged. So, like the stock markets, much of it, like the interest rates, currency rates. I mean, how does rigging tie into it? Because they can always come up with new tricks.
Yeah, well, you know, you can only do that for so long. Look, if the government really could manipulate the gold market, gold wouldn't be at 1220. It would still be, you know, down at 300 or lower where it was in 2000. You know, if they can rig markets.
Well, we know they're trying is what I'm saying.
Yeah, they try, but they're not going to succeed. The markets are much bigger. The fundamentals ultimately win out. They can succeed in delaying the inevitable, but all that does is make the inevitable bigger, right? So if the government is trying to prevent gold from going up, when it eventually does go up, it's going to go up even higher.
Well, that's what they say about earthquakes, too. They say the fact that California is way overdue means there's even more pressure when it finally hits. Are you saying it's the same for economics?
Yeah, I mean, those tremors are good because they take the pressure off the faults. You need the little tremors so you don't have a bigger quake. But think about wage and price controls. You know, what happens when the government has a price control on something for a while because they try to cover up the symptoms of inflation, and then they give up and they take away the controls, and then you get a huge spike in price. So if the government's going to try to manipulate the market, it's not going to last. But a lot of the manipulation isn't really manipulation. It's just people being foolish. You've got big banks like Goldman Sachs shorting gold, telling their clients to short gold. A lot of people, unfortunately, listen to Goldman Sachs, and they're doing the wrong thing. So a lot of times the markets are just mispriced because so many people don't get it. Just like all the people who were buying the subprime mortgages before the bottom dropped out of the market, or all the people who were buying those .com stocks for several years before they collapsed. So the same thing is going to happen now. There's a lot of people following.
Peter's Skype cut out for just a moment. We're trying to reconnect with him here at the end. You know, my job's fun in many ways. It's also scary. But the good news is time goes on. We're going to get to find out who's right in all this. Peter, your Skype cut out for a moment. But Europac.com, do you think it'll be evident that we're in a real global recession soon, in the next few months, or will it take later?
Well, look, I think it's more of a U.S. All
right, Peter Schiff is gone. Hey, it's okay. Skype cut out at the end. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. Europac.com. I'm Alex Jones with InfoWars.com and PrisonPlanet.com.